Hey there, I'm Teresa Matsura, and you're listening to Uncanny Japan. Rewind to 1993. I just moved to small-town Yaizu after 2 years studying at university in Shizuoka City. By no means a big city, but it was big enough. Yaizu blew my mind. It was like I'd been hurled into what felt like a more authentic and older Japan. This was shown to me often, from how funerals were handled to how laundry was hung out. Note, jeans with holes in the knees were embarrassing enough to warrant a visit from the Oba-chan Brigade. One thing I learned early on is someone is always watching. But on this one particular day, I was all alone in the house, noodling about, probably translating and trying to cook something from a Japanese cookbook. No internet back then, so dinner took hours. When I heard some loud music coming from outside, it was decidedly upbeat, jangly even, and moving closer. Very much like what you're hearing now. So you know I ran to the door to see what was going on, right? Would you like to explore the stranger, more obscure corners of Japanese culture? Dig a little deeper into superstitions, curious customs, and all those mysterious creatures that inhabit the land? If so, then this is the podcast for you. Uncanny Japan is where I, author Teresa Matsura, share all the fascinating tidbits I unearth while doing research for my writing. From the bizarre to the ghastly, and everything in between. I hope you enjoy the show. So what was that raucous music coming from outside? Well, I didn't know right away because I had no one to ask, but let me describe what I saw. Talk about a throwback in time. There, weaving their way slowly up the street, was a procession of probably 5 or 6 men and women, all decked out in old-fashioned garb and playing various instruments. More specifically, the women were dressed in very brightly colored and patterned kimono, their hair oiled and done up with combs and pins. One of the men looked like he'd stepped out of a samurai flick, complete with top-knot, chonmage, while the other one was dressed in a Shichi-fukujin, 7 lucky gods costume. He was sporting the poofy red hat and wielding a magic mallet, just like Daikokuten. All but Daikokuten had an instrument, or instruments in the case of the drums. The lady with the drums had 2 of different sizes, stacked vertically on top of one another. There was also a brass plate-looking thing attached that acted like a loud bell. Another woman played a shamisen, traditional 3-stringed instrument, while the third in line had a clarinet. Our samurai fellow was blowing on a sax, and our lucky god was handing out flyers, dancing around, and wearing a sandwich board. Yeah, a sandwich board. What you have here, folks, is a Chindon-ya, and they are indeed hired to advertise the opening of a new store, a big sale, or some other special event. It's insanity, but in a very good way. Chindon-ya is an onomatopoeia, the chin being the sound of the bell, the don being the drums, while ya just indicates that it's a job or a shop, like panya, bread store or bakery, omochaya, toy store, izakaya, cool Japanese bar. But they weren't always called that. It's pretty much agreed that the idea of Chindon-ya began back in 1845 in Osaka. At that time, there was a candy maker who sang and made a bunch of noise to attract people to his store. He'd dress up in a straw hat, straw sandals, strap on a belt with these bells all over it, then start hollering about why everyone should buy his candy. His name was Amekasu, and it turns out that he was very good at what he did. So good that other shops were like, "Hey, I'll pay you, come attract people to my shop too." And so he did. After him came a man named Isami Kame, but his thing was he would shout Tolzai, which literally means east-west, but actually means listen up. Or I kind of imagine it to be come one, come all. It was from that catchphrase that this way of advertising became known as the Tolzai-ya. That was out west in the Kansai area. Some years later, in 1885, one of the Tolzai-ya callers relocated to Tokyo and started his own advertising business. It was called Hirome-ya, wide eyes. The same recipe didn't work, though, in the Kanto area. One person making a spectacle of themselves wasn't attracting customers. So being adaptable, he hired more people, gave them all different instruments, and had them march through the streets, playing, handing out flyers, and drawing attention to the new shop or special sale or event that way. This worked, and these processions in the Kanto area were dubbed Hirome-ya, the name of his agency. But altogether, they're known as Chindon-ya today. It's said the years roughly between 1946 and 1960 were the golden age of the Chindon-ya, with around 2,500 different groups performing all over Japan. Slowly, though, the modern age arrived, and by 1985, it seems like there were only about 150 groups left. And the performers were all in their 60s or so. In the 30-something years here, that was the first and the last time I saw a live Chindon-ya. But don't you fret. They are still around, although sometimes they're more of a hobby or a part-time gig. And I found that there's even a contest every April where dozens of Chindon-ya gather to perform. It's in Toyama City, so if you live there or ever visit, check the city's event page because for 3 days in April, under the blooming cherry trees along the Matsu River, around 30 different Chindon groups perform. In general, a Chindon-ya group is usually somewhere between 3 and 7 people, although there can be quite a bit more. Male and female. The first person in the procession is called a hatamochi or hatadori. They carry a flag and they hand out flyers for the business. Next is the oyakata. They'll usually play the chindon drum as well as have a paper umbrella secured to the get-up. Third could be a shamisen or another drum. I've even seen a banjo too. After that person comes the wind instruments. A clarinet is nice, so is a saxophone, and or a trumpet. The word for loud, flashy, or gaudy in Japanese is hade. And I think that word really defines what a Chindon-ya is. The music, the costumes, the performance, it's all over the top and boisterous. I personally love the mixing up of East and West, a saxophone with a shamisen, and time. Women decked out in kimono with the white makeup of a geisha, while next to her is a saxophonist wearing a bowler hat, bow tie, pinstriped suit, and a bright green wig. What? The music, too, can be anything from traditional Japanese tunes to jazz. Although there is a single song that is representative of the Chindon-ya, it was written by a man named Tanaka Hotsumi, who happened to be the leader of a Navy band in Sasebo in 1902. If that ever comes up in conversation, now you know. Also, the name of the song is Utsukushikitennen. I watched an interview with a man who has been doing Chindon-ya for over 50 years, and he said that Japanese didn't even know about triple time until after the war. So when they learned about it, that tempo became quite popular. The song Utsukushikitennen was not just a song that was easy and anyone could play it, but it was also well loved because it was not really upbeat. It has this underlying melancholy feeling to it that the Japanese people really like. I agree with that. And there's a little more to the Chindon-ya. It's not just music and dancing and handing out flyers. There will be one performer who talks or calls out, touting the shop or event and making otherwise funny jokes or whatever to make the bystanders laugh, grab a flyer, and hopefully visit the store. Back in my hometown in the States, we had a guy in a ratty-looking bunny suit on the corner every single day spinning a sign. That was the exact opposite of making me want to run over and see what he was advertising. Just kind of made me feel bad, actually. Anyway, I encourage you to go to YouTube and watch some videos. You'll definitely get a kick out of them. And one more thing before I go. I want to dedicate this episode to my father-in-law. He passed away last month, and he was really one of my favorite people. You've surely heard about my mother-in-law here. She's a firecracker and a half, and everyone knows it. But no matter what issue we were dealing with, he always took my side, especially when she was being a little bit much. One funny story was when I made apple pie for the first time. I must have been very newly married, like within the first year or first 6 months or something. And I noticed a complete dearth of pies in the city. So I baked an apple pie and I took it over to my in-laws, just assuming that they'd love it. Well, my father-in-law gushed about how delicious it was, the best thing he's ever eaten. While my mother-in-law was like, "I've been married to you for 40 years and you hate cinnamon." "Not anymore," he said. He was so sweet and giving, funny, and absolutely selfless. The kind of grandpa that would spend all day constructing a fort in his room out of cardboard just to surprise Julian when he went over to visit. He also had the best smile. It was a big family with quite a few brothers and sisters, their children, and all the grandchildren that came. All the adults called him Ko-chan, and we called him Oji-chan, or Ji-ji, Grandpa. Okay, one more story about how sweet he was. He worked making kamaboko at a tiny place down the street from where we lived. Kamaboko is often translated as fish cakes, but there isn't much cake involved. It's basically white fish all mushed up and reshaped, then steamed. You'll find it sliced and put into ramen sometimes. Anyway, he worked at this little factory from the time he was in elementary school until he retired in his 70s. While there for lunch, he and the other workers, probably like half a dozen, would get an obento delivered. And with the obento, he'd always get this small Japanese wagashi dessert. Those delicate little beauties often made from smooth rice flour and bean paste. They're shaped into seasonal motifs like chrysanthemums or autumn leaves. Well, every day for years, before he even ate his lunch, he'd wrap up that day's wagashi and bring it over for me to eat. And we'd chat a little bit too. So this episode is going to go up on the 15th, which just happens to be his Shiju Kunichi, the 49th day after a person's passing. This is a very important day. It's when the urn containing the deceased's ashes is usually interred. But also for 49 days, it's believed that a person's spirit just wanders. It's on the Shiju Kunichi that the loved one finally moves on and makes it into heaven. There's a ceremony and everything. Gigi loved music. I mean, he really loved music, especially old songs of his youth. The song Utsukushikitennen was really popular when he was young. So with this episode, I imagine a nice rollicking Chindon-ya, dancing and playing Oji-chan into the Buddhist paradise, letting everyone know he's arrived, and everyone excited that he's there. And Oji-chan's big old smile. Oji-chan いつも優しくしてくれた。ありがとうございました。